تمشى بالحفاظ عشوك عجلي وعلى النار.
بن بولعيد واسمه مصطفى، علي لطوانت وبدي عمر. القصبة ما زالها واقفة وما زالوا عساس الدار، ما زالها سعلة السقيفة وما زالها حرمة الجار. أنا يا بلادي راني عارف هما ما كانوش عارفين،
دهشوا نهار علي ما توقف، احنا عادتنا نموت واقفين. نموت على النيف والشرف، نموت على الوطن والدين، علمنا بلا ريح يرفرف، احنا هما الجزائريين. أنا يا بلادي على بالي هما ما كانوش فاهمين،
حبوا يديو البلاد ديالي، حسبونا ماناش قادرين. فكتهم حسيبة بنبوع لي الجميلة تونسى الأخرين، من حقك يا الجزائر تولولي ولدي نساو رجال حرين. أنا يا بلادي سمحيلي ما قدرتش نذكرهم كاملين،
واش نذكر واش نخلي شهداء رواحهم طاهرين، مازالهم في قلبي وفي بالي، ربي يرحمهم أجمعين. والقصبة مازالها ديالي وسط الدار والعرس واقفين.
معليش يا القصبة وريلهم
قرصان رياس وساطيل، على عروج وخير الدين احكي لهم،
وفهم الناس اللي جاهلين
باللي الجزائر ماهيش ليهم، ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس. كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين،
باللي الجزائر ماشي ديالهم، ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس. كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jazair Hope friends, good evening. Welcome to tonight's discussion titled Western Sahara, Maneuvers to Preserve a Fragile Monarchy. We are honored to have with us Dr. Jacob Mundy, Associate Professor and Chair of Peace and Conflict Studies at the Colgate University, and the leading expert on North African conflicts, particularly the ongoing situation in Western Sahara. Dr. Mundy has extensively researched and co-authored significant works on this topic, including the book Western Sahara War, Nationalism and Conflict Irresolution. Tonight, we will delve into the complex geopolitical interests driving US, France, and Spanish support for Morocco's stance on Western Sahara, and explore how these interests are impact both regional stability and international law. We will also examine the roles of Algeria, African Union, and the UN peace process in this enduring conflict. Thank you again for being here, and please join me welcoming Jacob and thanking him for accepting to speak to us this evening. Jacob, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So we will dive directly into this the topic of tonight. So Jacob, a couple of weeks back, you wrote a paper titled "The U.S., France, and Spain are deluding themselves on the Western Sahara." In your analysis, you argue that the U.S., France, and Spain's support for Morocco's stance is driven by geopolitical interests rather than conflict resolution. Can you explain to us or elaborate on this paper, please?
Certainly. We've seen recently the French have endorsed Morocco's 2007 autonomy proposal as the only solution to the Western Sahara conflict. This follows Spain a few years ago, using similar language that autonomy is the only solution. And then in 2020, we infamously received news that President Trump had endorsed Morocco's autonomy proposal as the solution, but even worse, the United States would now recognize Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. So it appears as if there's a consensus among three very important actors, the United States, France, and Spain, supporting Morocco's autonomy proposal. What I argued is that this support is not about peace in Western Sahara. It's not about resolving this conflict. It's about short-term interests of the United States, of France, of Spain. So if we go in reverse order, the United States backed Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara, endorsed the autonomy proposal because they wanted Morocco to recognize.
Sorry, Jacob, just to interrupt 10 seconds. When you say Spain, US, and France, in fact, and let me know if I'm wrong, you mean Trump and Macron and Sanchez, not the countries as institutions.
Well, unfortunately, in the United States, it is now the policy of the Biden administration that they have chosen not to rescind this recognition, even though it's illegal, even though the United Nations Secretary General has said whether or not the United States recognizes Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara doesn't change the fact that we view it as a colony, that Western Sahara is a non-self-governing territory. And so, yes, we must be clear that these policies are made by individuals, right? And these are individuals who are thinking about short-term politics, right? So again, for the Trump administration, it was about Israel, the Abraham Accords, and now we see that this has opened up investment opportunities for the Trump family, in the UAE and Emirates, or in Israel, and things of that sort. And we know that Kushner, the spouse of Trump's daughter, is a conservative Jewish with ties to Israel and things like that, right? With Spain, we know that for Sanchez, right, it's all about migration, and that by increasing the level of support that Spain offered Morocco on Western Sahara, they could, in exchange, get more cooperation on migration, which is the key issue in Spanish politics. It's a key issue across the for all of the Southern European countries, from Spain to Greece, right? They're all obsessed with migration, right? And so for Sanchez, by doing this, it allowed them to have better cooperation with Morocco. And now we have Macron making this decision, right? And again, it's about short-term. You use the term geopolitics. I think these are often more domestic politics, right? When we look at Spain, when we look at France, right, these are much more about domestic political issues, right? The news we're getting out of France today about the difficulty Macron is facing forming a government, right? And now it appears that he's going to be denounced by the left parties that actually won the election, and so I'm not even sure that there's a, I think for the United States, right, there's a kind of thinking about bigger geopolitical issues, But for France and Spain, those are often very just sort of basic domestic politics. And so they don't care about Western Sahara, right? It's a small gift they can give Morocco, and they get a big gift in return. So.
Okay, so basically, according to you, when you mentioned that Western support to Morocco has worsened the security situation in the Sahara and Sahel region, how does this alignment potentially, according to you, destabilize the region, and what are the broader implications for international security?
Well, I mean, the most obvious issue is that as long as the Western Sahara conflict continues, and as long as Morocco is allowed to engage in the aggressive expansion of territory by force, you will have an unstable region, right? The Sahrawis, they're not leaving, they're not going anywhere. They're not going to stop wanting their own country, just because, Paris, Madrid, and Washington say so, right? There was a think tank in the United States that said the Western Sahara conflict is over, and it's you have to laugh because they didn't bother to ask the Western Saharans what they thought, right? The conflict is not over, right? The conflict continues. And if you want to have a stable, secure, prosperous North Africa and the Sahara-Sahel region, right, wouldn't it be great to have tensions between Morocco and Algeria, which have increased recently, right, to de-escalate those, right? So does letting Morocco have what it wants in Western Sahara, which is illegal, right? It's illegal under international law, right? The whole international community recognizes this. So does that bring us closer to regional cooperation towards, having Morocco and Algeria cooperate on Sahara-Sahel? No, it further divides the region. But that, we can talk about this later, but I think that's the actual, characteristic of what's going on, is the continuing division of North Africa.
You mentioned in the case of the three countries about short-term interest, but in the same time you are mentioning now about the huge implication on the security in the region of Sahel and North Africa in general. What is, according to you, driving this support from the perspective of the Moroccan monarchy? What is driving this support?
Well, first of all, there's history, right? So there's a lot of history here. I mean, there's a lot of history between France and Morocco, the United States and Morocco, Spain and Morocco. But what Morocco is always very good at is trying to understand the needs of more powerful countries, right? So what did the United States want during the Cold War, right? Well, they wanted anti-communism, anti-socialism, cooperation in terms of fighting communism, things of that sort, right? So Morocco, because it's a relatively weak country, right? It doesn't have kind of extensive natural resources, right? It's agriculturally dependent. It's lives under the weight of a feudal monarchical political system that's barely reformed, right? And so in order to survive, Morocco has always tried to figure out what can we do for powerful countries, right, that will allow us, especially the Moroccan regime, to survive. So during the Cold War, it's anti-communism. After the Cold War, it's about globalization. After 9/11, it's about counterterrorism, right? And today, it appears to be a kind of bigger question about what I view as a Middle East that is being divided in two. Right? So you have a kind of Israel, Emirates, and then Morocco is part of this coalition. And now you see the opposite way, which is countries that want to, or they view the future of geopolitics as more aligned with the BRICS, with a kind of Chinese vision of the world, or at least a multipolar world, right? And the United States would rather, in order to maintain its hegemony, I think, would rather have a divided Middle East, right, than one that would be open to a multipolarity.
I would like we dig a little bit further into the most recent support, the France one. The context is a little bit different than, for example, in the case of Trump, whereby against that support, he bought a normalization between Morocco and Israel. In the case of France, is a little bit difficult to understand. There was an electoral context in France. On one side, they are in transition politically, but is there more to it? I mean, do you feel that there is a concern about the stability of the Moroccan regime? Because France has significant interest with Algeria, so crossing this line is quite significant.
Well, this is, I think, an important question. The other aspect to this is we have to remember that for several years, relations between the heads of state of Morocco and France, between Macron and M6, were very cold. Coming out of the Pegasus spying scandal, we saw that the French president was in some ways kind of actively, rejecting the overtures of the Moroccan monarchy. Even when Mohammed VI was, sick and in Paris, and sort of kind of desperate to get the French president's attention, we weren't getting that. So it's surprising that we went from the possibility of maybe a more balanced French approach to North Africa, and then immediately last month we went back to the way things always were, which is this very, very pro-Moroccan policy. The Algerians, to the extent that maybe they were warned, right, but they certainly weren't probably consulted, right, because if the French bothered to consult with Algeria, they would have said, endorsing Morocco's autonomy proposal is not how you get cooperation from Algeria. It's the exact opposite. So what is France doing, right? And we have to remember that with the Spanish didn't even tell anyone that they were going to make this decision, right? It came, from Sanchez and Alvarez, right? It was just, this decision, and the Algerians like, wait, you're going to make a decision about the future of North Africa, and you're not going to include Algeria, right? So that's the principle that I think for Algeria is very, whether the people or the government, right, that this is the important thing, is being consulted, right, and that their interests are respected. But it's very clear that the French have reverted back to a position of not respecting Algerian interests, the Algerian perspective, right? And so what is going on in terms of internal French politics? And I don't know, but something is going on where they just decided, we need Morocco, we don't need Algeria. And as we saw, right, there were some important economic deals that were frozen between Morocco and France that are now unlocked, right? And so those are moving forward in some ways, including, right, the World Cup is going to be co-hosted by Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. So stadiums need to be built, infrastructure needs to be brought forward, and things of that sort, right? So the Macron, Mohamed Saadi's, the reconciliation, right? It'd be interesting at some point if some journalist could find out how this happened, and why this happened.
Well, there is definitely an Algerian perspective to it, in the sense that France have failed to find a common perspective with Algeria, politically, economically, and on many fronts. So it's maybe an arm wrestling kind of game, or maybe they are just giving up on Algeria. So it has certainly something to do with this. Before we speak, Jacob, on the recent event in Japan, I want to share with you and with the audience this small video that is very recent. So it's last few days, where we see a huge amount, thousands of Moroccan migrants trying to swim towards Spain. And we will comment on it.
Shooter, Spain sees thousands of Moroccan migrants entering Europe, sparking debate about the future. Follow and like for more on this complex issue. Shooter, Spain sees thousands of Moroccan migrants entering Europe, sparking debate about the future.
So Jacob, I wanted to show this video because it's quite impressive by the size of what's happening, and in the same time, despite this support that Morocco is getting, we feel that something is not normal in the country. Something is wrong going on in Morocco. So what is your views on the recent events?
Well, we know that Morocco is currently experiencing a drought of significant proportions. And as I mentioned earlier, right, agricultural production is still very important to the Moroccan economy. Right? A lot of labor in Morocco is tied up in agriculture. And so if there's a drought, right, then that means agricultural production is going to be incredibly difficult, right? Especially in the areas that are confronting desertification. So south of the high Atlas in the Ouadra region, and where water is actually ironically being diverted for green energy projects, right? And that people aren't able to farm because they need all this water for this giant solar array or things of that sort. So we know that there's a really significant economic issue in Morocco. And we also know that the population is not happy about the government's increasing relationship with Israel. Night after night, they see the horrors coming from Gaza. And then they see, the foreign minister, Bourita, talk about Hamas as, terrorists, right? And things like that, right? So the Moroccan regime and the population are out of sync politically, very much on the Palestine issue. And underneath that, right, you have this economic catastrophe that's brewing if there isn't something done about the stress of the drought that's afflicting the agriculture, right? So no wonder you're seeing waves of Moroccans trying to flee the country, right? Because of these economic issues.
Okay, so now let's speak about what happened in Japan in relation to the role of Algeria. But before that, I want to show the video that has circulated, I think, extensively into internet. It will just a few seconds video. I think it's interesting to review it, and then. So my question in relation to this, Jacob, is that we have seen this clash between the Polisario and Morocco at the TCAD summit, highlights the ongoing tensions, of course. How do you view Algeria's and the African Union influence on these developments? And could its support for Polisario lead for further regional tensions or shifts into alliances, especially given the current geopolitical dynamics? But before you answer this question, this image shows also some kind of desperation for Morocco diplomacy to act like this. So if you can comment on that and then tell us how do you see the African Union, of course, Algeria and South Africa playing a role into this issue?
Well, we have to remember that Morocco left the Organization of African Unity in 1984 because the Western Sahara became a member state of the organization that preceded the African Union. Right? And so now we're looking at 40 years that Western Sahara has been a part of the African Union. Morocco returned in 2017 because I think they felt that they had gained so much ground in Africa, especially among the pro-French states, especially the ones that are still tied into the CFA currency and things like that. The Moroccans quickly learned that the African Union was not going to, kick was not going to remove Western Sahara, right? That's not going to happen. The African Union doesn't even have a mechanism to de-recognize a member state, right? So once you're a member state of the African Union, it's for life. Only if Western Sahara agreed to join Morocco would that happen. So Morocco's strategy to try to kick out Western Sahara is never going to work. And it was interesting the other day, Sahrawis online recirculated the official Moroccan government documents where they joined, Prime Minister Ben Keren joined the African Union in 2017. So the signature of the Moroccan monarch is actually on a document that recognizes Western Sahara as an independent country. Now, what I think happened in Japan, we must give credit to both the Japanese and to African Union for insisting that Western Sahara be a part of this meeting, because as we often see that in these multilateral Africa meetings, Western Sahara is often not included at the insistence of, let's say, the United States or France, right? So I give Japan and the African Union a lot of credit here. But what I see going on in this video clip is you talk about desperation. You said a clash, but it's really an assault, right? It's a one-sided unilateral assault. But the thing about Morocco, and one time a Moroccan journalist said to me, I said, what do you think Moroccan public opinion is on Western Sahara? And he said, we've never had an open discussion about Western Sahara. And that's why there's not really a public opinion, because the media, this journalist, his magazine was, the government got rid of it, right? So we also, ironically, he was part of that effort to have an open conversation. But this is the problem with Morocco, is there's no open conversation about Western Sahara. And so you can imagine a Moroccan diplomat, maybe for the first time in his life, is having to listen to a Sahrawi diplomat from the Polisario, from the Rast, and he's hearing things that he's never heard before, right? So you can imagine he's just overcome with emotion and anger, right? Because what the Sahrawi diplomat is saying in Japan is not allowed in Morocco, right? So and I think this is the problem, right? Is that there's no open debate in Morocco about Western Sahara.
Yeah, you mentioned about the credit that we should recognize to Japan, indeed, particularly because Japan does recognize the Western Sahara as part of Morocco. So allowing for the representative of Western Sahara to attend, respecting of course the African Union resolutions, is of a credit to them. But again, coming back to the core role of the African Union, and how can African Union, or do you see anytime soon the African Union impact the United Nations approach to this problem?
It's very difficult. It's interesting because when the UN mission in Western Sahara, MINURSO, was created, it was a joint UN OAU mission. And so really the mission in Western Sahara should be a UN African Union mission. But over the years, Africa has been marginalized from the Western Sahara peace process, partially because Africa has always been a very difficult environment for the Moroccans. So the Moroccans are much more comfortable with the UN Security Council for obvious reasons, especially today because of France and the United States. And so the African Union never got to play its full part in the UN mission in Western Sahara. So right now, it's very difficult to see what the African Union could do to move the issue forward. Though I think lately we've seen a lot of success for Western Sahara in the international legal domain. So the European courts, South Africa seizing a vessel, right? Things of that sort. So especially when the African Union can assist in Western Sahara establishment of its legal personhood, right? Similar to the Palestinians, right? Part of the Palestinian struggle is the recognition that Palestine is a state that has international legal personhood. And one of the challenges for Western Sahara is the same thing, that Western Sahara is a state independent with international legal personhood. And establishing that allows Western Sahara to act internationally, right? And so that's why it's really important. So if the African Union can assist this legal pathway to Western Saharan statehood, then that's probably the most helpful.
Yeah, I see. Jacob, before I move to the next question related to the United Nations situation or role, you mentioned that Morocco can never exclude Western Sahara from the African Union because of the resolutions and whatever is agreed on the African Union Charter. But suggestion is to look at it's an observation, and the suggestion, because you are working on this issue, is to look at this aspect from the sport perspective, where Morocco, through lobbying, through the African Olympic Committee, they changed the rules to not allow Western Sahara to participate in sport events. I think it's an interesting angle to look at how Morocco achieved that, through what lobbying, and because if we look at, for example, Palestine, they are not yet recognized as a state by the United Nations, but still they participate in the sport event, which is not the case for Western Sahara. So it is just a suggestion, an angle that you might want to look at. I don't know if you have looked at it before.
Well, I know the controversy over the Moroccan the football team, and that their jerseys had a map that showed Western Sahara, and the Algerians were not going to accept them as players. But unfortunately, I mean, we've seen in international sports, this is a space where there's a lot of corruption, right? From the World Cup in Qatar, to the things that Imam Khalifa suffered, right, with that Russian boxing federation, right? So we know that corruption in sports is a huge problem, and we also know from the scandals at the EU that Morocco is not afraid to bribe, people to get what it wants. So does Morocco use its money to get corrupt agencies to do what it wants? Yeah, all the time. I mean, at the European level, we've seen this.
Yeah. Okay, but back to the United Nation peace process failures, if I can call it like that. What do you believe are the primary reasons for the UN's failure to make progress on Western Sahara peace process? And what strategies could revitalize efforts towards resolution? We know that US, France, and Spain did what they did, but as United Nations, what is blockading that?
Yeah. Well, when the UN mission was created, it was to organize a referendum on independence. So would the Western Saharans vote for independence or integration? And this was because Hassan Thani, he wanted a referendum. Now, Hassan II, he was playing games and trying to shape the electorate, with like Moroccans pretending to be Sahrawis. But according to my analysis, two key events in 1999 happened. So Hassan II died, and with him died the Moroccan policy of the referendum. And that very soon after that, Mohammed VI said no referendum, and that's become the Moroccan policy. And the other thing that happened, which is interesting, is that same summer, the summer of 1999, there was a referendum in East Timor. Now, if you know the history, right, East Timor is very similar to Western Sahara, right? It was a Portuguese colony. The Indonesians took it over. The people wanted independence. And in East Timor, they had a referendum in 1999. Interestingly, it was a referendum on autonomy. And the East Timorese said, no, we don't want autonomy. And so that meant they got independence. But then the Indonesian military started killing people. And so the UN Security Council had to intervene and stop the killing. And the Security Council at that point said, okay, Hassan II died, and we just had a referendum in East Timor, and it was a disaster. And what they're really thinking is, what happens if we have a referendum in Western Sahara, the people vote for independence, and Morocco doesn't leave, right? So they're finally confronting this reality that there could be a vote on independence, and Morocco's not going to leave, and that means the Security Council has to put pressure on Morocco, and they decide they don't want to do that, and so in 2000 everything changes, and they say what we want is Morocco and Polisario to reach an agreement before there's a referendum. And of course, this allows Morocco to, change its position, say we don't want a referendum, no independence, our sovereignty won't be questioned, yada yada yada, right? And so, what really happened from the year 2000 until today, so almost 25 years, right, is the UN has the Security Council, really, we're talking about the Security Council and the group of friends led by the United States, right, has said we want a comprehensive political agreement between Morocco and Polisario before there would be any kind of referendum, right? And of course that means Morocco gets to say no to anything. So Morocco can veto whatever it doesn't like. What's changed now recently is, before the Security Council said, or at least let's say France, the United States, and Spain, they said, okay, Morocco's autonomy proposal is a good proposal, but we want negotiations between the party. Now, France, Spain, and the United States are saying Morocco's autonomy proposal is the basis for negotiations, right? And this is what Morocco has wanted since 2000, right? Is to say that Morocco gets to dictate the terms of the political agreement. and from the Polisario perspective, this is Morocco dictating the terms of their surrender, right? And we can go into like legally how Morocco's proposal isn't even autonomy, but that's another issue.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question on this discussion, Jacob, is regarding a broader view on what's happening geopolitically. And the reason for the question is that because we see a lot of parallels between Israel's occupation of Palestine's territories and Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. Along with the Ukraine conflict, do you see this as a part of a broader struggle between what we can call the global West and the global South for a new order, as we might call it?
Well, I think we think about the world has lived under the dominance of the North Atlantic powers, led by the United States since World War II. And something really interesting happened in the 60s and 70s, which is the Vietnamese defeated the United States. And the Vietnamese, first they defeated the French, and then the Algerians defeated the French. But then the Vietnamese, the Koreans, and then the Koreans and the Chinese, and then the Vietnamese defeated the United States. And since the 1970s, the United States has tried to think about how do we dominate the world if we can't go in and directly use military force, right? Because military force rarely works, especially in contemporary conflicts. So the United States saw this in Iraq, in Afghanistan, right, indirectly in Syria. But what the United States had learned, right, is that conflicts, right, that are unresolved can be very beneficial, right? So what is the ongoing conflict over Palestine? What does it do? What does it give the United States, right? Versus what would actually happen if that conflict was resolved, right? The United States, right, has a lot of influence over North Africa through Morocco if the Western Sahara conflict continues. Same with France, right? If the Western Sahara conflict was resolved, right, that would mean a lessening of influence, right? So the United States has realized that the way that it can, have influence in the world is by keeping conflicts going. I mean, this is the old Roman saying, divide and rule, right? Divide imperare, right? And so the United States has learned since Vietnam that divide and rule is a much better strategy for being a dominant hegemonic actor in the world, right? So what I think, sadly, is that there are more incentives to continue the Western Sahara conflict geopolitically than there are to resolve it. Right? And so that's and same with Palestine, right? So that's.
There was a question when I made the announcement, which is also a parallel between North Africa and the Middle East. The same way we feel that Iran is being provoked into a conflict. Do you see that Morocco is also being used to provoke Algeria for war? Do you see this? Is this likely? What are your views on this? And what will be the interest of taking Algeria and Morocco into war?
Well, this is what I see as the dynamic that is shaping up, which is the Middle East is being divided into two spheres, right? One is Israeli aligned, another is going to be Iranian aligned, right? And that this is how the Middle East will be shaped, right? And whether Algeria likes it or not, right, it's going to be pushed in one direction, right? Because Algeria has always wanted independence, right? It wants self-determination. It doesn't want to, it doesn't want to be forced to choose anyone, right? But it will be forced into the quote unquote Iran camp, if you want to call it that. And behind Iran, obviously, it's the new Cold War. So my problem with the way, because the United States is now obsessed with China, right, and to a lesser extent Russia, but this new Cold War mentality, right, and that this Cold War is now reshaping the Middle East in a way where countries are being told they have to be on one side or the other, right? You're either with the axis of resistance, with Iran, or you're with the Abraham Accords, right? And this is, on the one hand, it seems to be setting the stage for conflict, right? Increased conflict. But on the other hand, right, this fits with the pattern of divide and rule, right? I always think it's very interesting that, there were some really interesting peace initiatives going on in the Middle East before the war on Gaza, right? You had China reconciling the Saudis and the Iranians,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Right, things of that sort. And so, the French withdrawing from the Sahel, right? So there were positive developments, and then all of a sudden, it seems like the United States couldn't stand being excluded from the Middle East, right? So, and then this catastrophe in Gaza allows the United States to reassert itself,
Yeah.
right?
So I understand.
Look at the ceasefire. The ceasefire negotiations. Why is the United States leading the ceasefire negotiations? They clearly can't. Clearly can't get it, right? So, who is the United States to try to even bring peace, to this region?
Well, look, I see that you kind of agree that there is that the three issues in Ukraine, Middle East, and to a lesser extent in Sahel do converge. Morocco and Western Sahara do converge. My last question, Jacob, how do you see this unfolding, or at least scenarios-wise, how do you see this unfolding?
Well, at the start of this program, right, we talked about what I argued in World Politics Review. I didn't really think that, at least in the short term, I don't think there will be a significant change in Western Sahara in terms of the conflict. I think, for example, the UN mediator, the UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, he's been on the job for several years now, and he hasn't had the parties even meet, right, once, right? The Moroccans want a round table. Algeria says, no, we're not a party to this conflict. Why do you keep saying that we are? And so, perhaps there will be a new push for face-to-face negotiations, but we've known for 20 years that face-to-face negotiations don't work. So I don't think there will be, in terms of the peace process. I think anyone who thinks that the fact that, France, Spain, and the United States are now more pro-Moroccan than they were before, which was, very pro-Moroccan, that's not going to change anything that's going on. I think if these countries were serious about the kinds of instability that's, with Algeria, think about what happened, on the border with Mali, right, where you have Ukrainians and Russians like fighting each other in Mali, on the Algerian border, right? That's a serious concern for the Algerians, right? So if the North Atlantic countries wanted to get serious about North African security, Mediterranean security, Sahara-Sahel security, right, they would not be doing this ridiculous autonomy stuff in Western Sahara. They would try to be much more neutral, multilateral, things of that sort, right? But as you mentioned, right, the United States is so obsessed with Israel, so obsessed with Ukraine right now. They can't even, everything else is just, and now Joe Biden won't be president, right? So his policies aren't even really that important until the end. right? As it appears that Kamala Harris will have a different foreign policy team, so we will get new people, and certainly I would like to see some different actors. So, for example, in the United States, the coordinator for North African policy, Brett McGurk, he's just been a disaster for the region, right? So hopefully we can get rid of him and other people. But yeah, I do. As we mentioned earlier, the other thing to be concerned about is the stability of Morocco, right? Could we see a large scale? We've seen a lot of protests this summer about Palestine. Could this become something larger, especially if the economic situation isn't addressed going forward? So, yeah, certainly there's a very volatile situation, and unfortunately for Algeria, right, that you have volatility in Libya, you have volatility in the Sahel, you have volatility in Morocco, right? I feel very Algeria, it's a very difficult situation for them, but hopefully things will remain very stable in Algeria as they have been for a few years.
Absolutely, we do realize that. As you know, there is a presidential election in 10 days' time or so. Things are going very well, very smooth internally, because of what's happening in the borders. There is a higher awareness among Algerians, and the divide that we have seen in the previous years have faded out because of all those tensions, which is quite positive. But we do realize that the situation is very difficult, and that we need to monitor this very wisely. It's complicated. Jacob, I really enjoyed the discussion. We have done a little bit more than 50 minutes. I hope that you enjoyed it too. I would like to thank you again for being with us tonight. It was very insightful, and I wish you a great day ahead.
Yeah, it was great being with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also very much for being with us, for your comments. As usual, it always helps me to follow through the discussion. I wish you a nice evening, and give you an appointment in a few days for another guest, another debate. Hope to see you soon, Jacob. Bye.
احنا الشعب اللي تمشى بالحفاظ، عالشوك عجلي وعلى النار.
بن بولعيد واسمو مصطفى، علي لابوانت وبدي عمر. القصبة ما زالها واقفة وما زالوا عساس الدار، ما زالها سعلة السقيفة وما زالها حرمة الجار. أنا يا بلادي راني عارف، هما ما كانوش عارفين.
دهشو نهار علي ما توقف، احنا عادتنا نموت واقفين. نموت على النيف والشرف، نموت على الوطن والدين. علمنا بلا ريح يرفرف، احنا هما الجزائريين. أنا يا بلادي على بالي، هما ما كانوش فاهمين.
حبوا يديو البلاد ديالي، حسبونا ماناش قادرين. فكتهم حسيبة بنبوعلي الجميلة تونسى الأخرين. من حقك يا الجزائر تولولي ولدي نساو رجال حرين. أنا يا بلادي سمحيلي، ما قدرتش نذكرهم كاملين.
واش نذكر واش نخلي شهداء رواحهم طاهرين مازالهم في قلبي وفي بالي، ربي يرحمهم اجمعين. والقصبة مازالها ديالي وسط الدار والعرس واقفين.
معليش يا القصبة وريلهم
قرصان رياس وساطيل على عروج وخير الدين احكي لهم،
وفهم الناس اللي جاهلين
واللي الجزائر ماهيش ليهم ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين.
باللي الجزائر ماشي ديالهم ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين.
حبك حكاية يا للناس، انتي رواية كلك إحساس. حبك حكاية يا للناس، انتي رواية كلك إحساس. انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية. مدة وسنين كلك حنين، أنا وياك عشناها الاثنين. مدة وسنين كلك حنين، أنا وياك عشناها الاثنين. انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية. انتي القمر ليلة سمر، كيفاش ننسى ابن البشر. انتي القمر في ليلة سمر، كيفاش ننساك يا ابن البشر. انتي رواية